everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Safety Brief. Today, we're diving into a topic that's increasingly relevant to our digital security, the dark web. It's not just a mysterious term, but a crucial area impacting cybersecurity globally. So, let's explore some key questions and understand its significance and implications. We have Mike and Matt with us today, as always, to dive deeper into this topic. Thank you both for being here and for your amazing dedication to spreading awareness.
Sure thing.
All right, so let's dive right in. The internet we use daily is just the tip of the iceberg. We often talk about onions and layers in the safety brief, so this topic fits kind of right in of what we normally talk about. So, can you start by explaining what exactly the dark web is and how does it differ from the deep web and the surface web?
So, first off, there's a slight misnomer between deep web and dark web.
Hmm.
Deep web is nothing unusual. You use the deep web every day. Deep web is something that requires you to actually access via password, username or password, something that's not indexed, company websites, objects that you can't just Google and find, subsections of websites that aren't indexed. There's plenty of websites out there that are public that have areas that are not accessible by normal means. Generally, it's because they're gated off. A common way of looking at that would be Facebook. Facebook is 100% a public page. You are the product, literally. To access certain aspects of that, you need credentials in order to get in, which makes it part of the deep web. So it's a little bit interesting when you tell people that and they don't realize that they've been playing on the deep web and they think that it's this big, dark, scary monster when in actuality it's not. The dark, scary monster is the dark web. The dark web is designed intentionally to have everything obscure. It's not easy to find. The address that you would access with using an onion, it's not something you're going to memorize the web address of. Also, the web address of that with the onion can be killed and recreated very, very, very quickly to have it, redirected, new link, basically new phone who dis type situation. Um, the threat actors do it quite frequently. The address that they will send you to when you get hit with ransomware, those are generally a short-lived location, and then they'll change it because, contrary to popular belief, just because you're using Tor doesn't mean you're actually safe.
Yeah, indeed. I would, uh, you know, this is definitely something that's an area of Matt's expertise, but just to kind of sprinkle some nuance on top of it, I think um, the components with, the dark web, there's a lot of media, there's a lot of culture that would play on these words and create movies and use these terms in those senses. But yeah, correct. Like surface web, we're talking websites, YouTube, open source, Wikipedia type information, right? So this is when you think of the internet, most people's thoughts of the internet is the surface web, right? That's where they go to seek information or find information or check the news, check the weather, right? These are all things enabled by the World Wide Web as we know it. Yeah, and the deep web, it could also include things such as, to Matt's point, they are gated types of information. Like going through a graduate program, you have access to a virtual library of scholarly journals and research papers and medical records and things of those natures, depending on your craft that you're studying. Those are things certainly accessed via the internet, but they are not available on the surface web. They are gated behind some privileged level of access that is given to students or professors or so on and so forth, right? And so if you're doing any form of distance learning, if you're looking up scholarly journals, if you're going to Encyclopedia Britannica, things of that nature, you have memberships to some of these scholarly journal repositories, you're on the deep web fairly often. And so that's another component, at least from the educational spectrum, of where, deep web doesn't mean bad. It just means they are not publicly accessible to anybody rolling down the street, if you will, with an internet connection, right? There's certain things that are gated by levels of access. Similar to a lot of these telehealth medical platforms, right? So if you go and you have some form of virtual consult with a physician or a doctor or whatever, you'll have some post examination discharge papers or something of that nature, right? So you'll access that via a medical app or website. These are growing in commonality just in the face of more of a paperless society. But those are things in the deep web, right? And then to Matt's point, I think he outlined the dark web well enough, but specifically meaning these are not uh, moderated. There is no real jurisdiction. It's no man's land, if you will. And by the unencrypted nature of the internet, this exists. There's really no wrangling.
Yeah, and just to recap that a little bit, the surface web is like for search engines, social media, it's where most of our activity happens. And then beneath that lies the deep web, which contains unindexed content such as databases and private networks, like Hornsby said, those medical databases, or if you're military, your Mill Connect and things of that nature. And then there's the dark web. It's kind of a hidden part of the internet requiring special software to access, and it's known for its secrecy and some shady activities. So the dark web is and also can be used as a marketplace for cyber criminals, where sensitive data and cyber tools are bought and sold. With that being said, should businesses invest time in understanding the dark web and how it impacts their cybersecurity postures?
No, that'd be a terrible idea. I'm being completely sarcastic. The premise behind the dark web is to be able to get anything that you want and not have to worry about being found out. That
Mm.
makes it perfect for bad actors, basically Russia, to do what they want to do. The majority of the stuff that you will find you're going to have to translate it from another language, because the bulk of what you're finding is coming from overseas. It's unfortunate, but when you look at it, the dark web basically provided an economy for those that did not have an economy. If you were to look at this, and we're going to go on a little bit of a field trip here, back in the olden times of the 70s and the 80s, I know, we're stretching now. A lot of our listeners probably weren't even born then, but we're going to go with it. There was this war that was going on between two countries for the most part. One was a very large conglomerate that got broken down into, a bunch of other little countries. But there were no bullets that were fired. There were no tanks. There was nothing. It was a Cold War. That Cold War was all technology based. Everybody thinks that Cold War stopped because we said that it stopped. It didn't stop. The people that were involved in that, when the war ended, no longer had any kind of an income. They didn't have a livelihood. There was no need for them anymore overseas. A lot of them had extremely particular skill sets. Think Liam Neeson, but actually a threat. I mean, no offense, Liam, but you don't scare us. We have a particular set of skills. You want to test them out? Come on. These people had technology skills that were just off the charts. So what's the best way for them to make a living when they can't get employment? Start going to the shadier areas, do things for hire. That's where you started hearing about people that were becoming hackers for hire, where you started hearing about all these threat groups that were coming together because they realized that they were smarter than a lot of the people in this world, and they could get what they want by leveraging the skill set that they had to provide for their family, to make sure that they had a lifestyle that they felt comfortable with. So knowing what's going on, knowing how the dark web was actually, how it came to be, yeah, you need to be keeping an eye on it. Your data could end up on there. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be very straightforward and transparent. Your data is on there. If you have ever signed up for any website in any way, shape, or form, your data is out there because that data has been sold countless times to countless other people that they too, or they themselves, are not as security conscious as many people would like them to be. Look at all the breaches. AT&T's breach. Guess what? That's on the dark web. I know it's on the dark web because I found it on the dark web. So if you were a customer of AT&T at any point, your stuff is out there. Equifax, your stuff is out there. Those are just tiny little recent ones. Advanced Auto Parts, I believe that was another one that just popped up. If you ever purchased anything from there, your information is now floating around in what most people would call the cloud, but is really just some other dude's computer. So there you go. Yeah, you need to be keeping an eye on it. And there's companies that offer services to do dark web monitoring to try and help let you know. They search for keywords. That's the one thing you have to realize. This dark web monitoring stuff, they're only searching for keywords. So the threat actors are getting smart and they're not using those keywords so that they don't pop up, so they don't get found. So, there you go. It's a giant game of cat and mouse. But that's what security is. It's been a cat and mouse game forever. They do something better than we do. We build better defenses. We build a better mousetrap. The mouse decides to use a jetpack to get over the trap to get the cheese. We now put anti-air on our mousetrap. They then tunnel underneath it and they do it. Now we're setting up, things to collapse tunnels. It's a constant battle. And if you're not monitoring to stay ahead of it, your company's going to end up regretting what ends up happening.
I'm just envisioning a mouse with a jetpack now.
That's
So
it.
am I. I really want one.
Need a Buzz Lightyear Mickey Mouse collab, and we'll have it.
Hey, Disney House of Mouse. I'm going to need you to get on that. There's your next movie. We wrote it for you.
Right. No, I think it's interesting again, we come back to what marketing is screaming versus what is congruent with reality. Is the dark web real? Yes, indeed. We've established that. Is monitoring valuable? Yes, indeed. However, I would be careful how many eggs we put in that basket, more so than just build resilience and prevention controls from what happens if data does get leaked. What does our resilience look like? Right. And so there's a difference between data leakage and ransomware, right? Like, I think the data leakage could be somebody inputting credentials in a phishing link. That is certainly a breach of data. However, it is used as a fulcrum point, as a launch point for a larger scale attack. And those attacks can be prevented. Those attacks can be thwarted, even if, the less than ideal happens. There are ways to prevent it. And so I would more so, rather than investing, maybe time, effort, energy, and educating everybody on the dark web, more so discuss what does it enable threat actors to do capability wise, and then build your defenses in light of it. And so assuming it's real, it's already prevalent, it's already what threat actors use. But it's interesting because I think in the grand scheme of things, the way most cyber practitioners maybe visualize it early on in their career is it's one versus many. The bad guy is one person. The bench responsible for defense is many. So we just got to be better than this one person. The reality is just as open source as the blue team defensive operators are in our industry, collaborating, sharing tools, throwing things on GitHub. Threat actors are doing the exact same thing. They are collaborating. They are building new tools. They are building new ways to get around the mousetrap. And because of that, just know your enemy and know the tools they have at their dispense. And so I think it should also, ultimately, it should warrant a level of reverence for the legitimacy of the threat and then act accordingly. You really can't sit back and say it's never really happened to me. I don't have to worry about that right now. That is certainly true statistically of other things. Statistically specific to cyber attacks, it's only getting more prevalent.
Interesting you mentioned GitHub because we're building all these defenses and then they get published on GitHub. Yeah, the threat actors know about GitHub. Just throwing that out there. In fact, a lot of the things that people build as POCs and say, this is only for testing purposes, this is not meant to be used for anything else. Yeah, guess what? It's being appropriated and used.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad you put that wall of text up there telling people that it's not supposed to be used for this. They don't care. I don't care either. I download it and I play with it too. I'm
Like
not
the
going to lie.
sign at a pool.
I mean, I build things with stuff from GitHub all the time just to see if I can make it do things that it shouldn't do. Guess what? There's people that are way smarter than me that are doing this and getting millions of dollars, from Bitcoin payments and crypto payments of other, I'm going to say denominations, but varieties, all because you're putting stuff up on a GitHub that they can then appropriate and do what they want to with it. So in a lot of cases, we're actually empowering them to build their next generation of toys and telling them, here's what we're defending against, and giving them a blueprint almost on how they can bypass it, which really, really makes it sad. And that kind of, it leads to a couple other things that we should talk about. But one of the things was how hackers use the dark web to distribute and sell malware. Web forums, those things from the early or the late 90s that people used to be all over that were, fun. I used to be on a bunch of them for racing and modifying cars. Well, the same things exist on the dark web, except it's to sell tools. It's to sell threats that can then be used to get into, an environment, or even more fun, they'll sell initial access. There are IABs or initial access brokers that sit on the dark web and will just post up and say, hey, we have access to this environment. It has this many endpoints. These are examples of some of the devices that we have access to. And people will look and say, oh, well, they've got one that has access to a domain controller or an AD server. We'll jump on that. And they'll buy that access, and then they'll go in there and they will end up, taking down the environment because they have access. So the bad part about that is researchers also sit on the dark web and they're looking at this stuff. And we just recently, I think today, in fact, we released something about dwell time and how it is killing the defense that everybody has. You find something that's out there as a researcher and you take it back to your organization and you tell them, hey, look what I found. And then they say, okay, research it, break it apart, do all of this. If you're good, that only takes you a couple days. If you're crappy at it, it still doesn't take you much more than a couple days. I mean, honestly, with the tools that are out there now, most people aren't manually doing this anymore. They're automating the process. But then it sits. And then 2 months later, there's this grand reveal of, look what we've been finding.
2 months ago.
Cool. You found that 2 months ago. It's been sitting there. It's been destroying people's environments. But you had to sit on it because you had to make sure that when you revealed it, that your product was capable of actually preventing it. Because how bad would it be if you found it, you revealed it, and then you get completely wrecked with it? Well, that doesn't help. And the bad actors know this. They know that there is a massive lag time. That's why they post up. They don't care. They'll say, hey, we've got this new tool. There's minimal secrecy because it's the dark web, but they don't care. The amount of time it takes for somebody to get it, research it, get it to the organization, and one vendor to actually have prevention because they had the ability to break down that one hash value, it's way too long. It leaves people open. And that's what they're doing. They're sitting there just posting this stuff day after day. They can create a new variant of it extremely quickly. So cool, you found one variant. Well, guess what? The one person that actually bought that, or the researcher that found that, they're reaching out to all kinds of other people on the back end and giving them different versions of it that get around the one that research found. Okay, Mike, the one that you put in there, do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that?
Steering clear meant maybe not discussing it. Specifically, the methods of accessing the dark web isn't maybe one we want to unpack here, but merely pointing to
Yeah.
the element that it enables threat actors to do certain things and transmit information. No different than, it's interesting, Matt, you talked about the forums component. A lot of listeners are going to be familiar with Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
And it serves as a single pane repository of forums that will align with interests and groups and things of that nature. In a very similar way, there are these forums that exist, obviously not as public facing as Reddit and not moderated by those with a code of ethics, but more so there are indeed collaboration platforms we're not going to discuss at length or educate on, because that's not the intent here, but more so calling attention to, hey, these things exist, this is what they enable, but indeed there are ways to thwart the kinetic repercussions of these kind of things existing, right? It's very much organized crime, in the traditional form of thinking, mafia like organized crime. It's very similar. There are a lot of people in the game. Initial access brokers are very much fixers of the cyberpunk world. They have no intention to get their hands dirty, but they absolutely know how to get the right information to the right people to carry out that attack. And so, there really is, as much as we'd love to say it's conspiracy and it's not real, there is a tangible amount of organization. And why is it? Well, there's money in it. People are doing this as a full-time job, and so they're feeding their families off it. They're buying property with it. It's income.
They run this better than most of our Fortune 100 and Fortune 10 companies. They have marketing departments that are set up to discuss their new releases, the capabilities, why it's better than their, other threat groups, which is really funny thinking of threat groups trying to out advertise one another, saying, hey, we're bigger jerks than these guys because our stuff does this. But it works. They have their own support desk. A lot of these guys actually have like full-blown ticketing systems that you use on the dark web if you purchased something from them and it doesn't work. They will have the equivalence of professional services to help you get it working. They have executive, or well, what would be considered executive, since most of them are anti-establishment. They will have something that is close to an executive board that helps shape where they want to go in all of this. Like if you think back to Alpha, after the Colonial Pipeline attack came out and stated this was a rogue entity that used our technology and went against what our mission is, with our tech, because they clearly stated no government entities should be taken, no educational, and nothing that impacted healthcare. Now, mind you, after the government annoyed them, they basically came out and said, yeah, we were being nice, but now everything is open game. So, they play nice. They try to play nice. They stay within their lanes, but they run these things like organizations, which is amazing to watch. And we can honestly learn a lot from how they operate on efficiency, because they've got the efficiency down.
Yeah, I think there's also, just as a brief aside, there is a hearts and minds component to this, that if they can appear in the public eye, almost congruent to a V for Vendetta type motif, where they are for the people, by the people, right? This type of, they'll carry any vernacular they can to gain, the hearts and minds. The reason for this is ultimately it's leverage. It's leverage. And if they can access information through certain people and certain parties that would enable a further, more kinetic attack, again, I think that is why they appeal to those types, right? That is very much, and there's NSA warnings on this, there's FBI warnings on this, but just be wary. You start Googling and going down these rabbit holes, like that is, you are openly researching that, right? So just be wary. Be wary.
Sorry, I'm laughing at one of our guys on Twitch and his comment they put up there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for calling the malicious help desk. How can I ruin someone's day? No, it's real. I mean, they have staff, they have personnel, they have training modules, they have documentation. It's real. The level of operational maturity is high. And I think that's the that's the the danger of maybe underestimating the enemy in this case.
I prefer to always estimate, never underestimate. Okay, that was terrible, but whatever.
Right.
So, to close off today, we never like to introduce a problem without a solution. So, what measures can individuals and businesses take to protect their data from being sold or exploited on the dark web? And I did like how Mike pointed out is sometimes it's impossible to protect it from happening, but you can have plans in place. That way, if it does happen, there's nowhere that they can go with that data, if that makes sense. So if y'all want to unpack that a little bit further to just close this out today.
I would say this. I would say like practical next steps for individuals and businesses. And this is going to be a common thread in the safety brief. We've been doing this a long time. Specifically, number one, be cognizant where you put your information. Be cognizant of where you put your data. You would not be overly paranoid if whenever you go to post a photo to social media, you post the screenshot versus the photo itself, because those photos have geographic and geotagging data within them. So there's a level of awareness that you can have around what does your online footprint look like, both from a business perspective and an individual perspective. Again, and where you're putting your data includes what email are you using. We had a whole session I know that we did in past weeks in the safety brief of what are more consumer level security tools that you can leverage that are not the Gmails and the Yahoos and the Hotmails of the world. But again, I think to this point, as much as you can proactively stay ahead of the game, we're still going to have immense data breaches such as these from AT&T and Disney's even bubbling up in some forms about also having a data breach. And so, again, be aware that there's no way to completely unplug to some degree, but be careful whom you steward your data with, who you're banking with, where you're doing your email collaboration with, what apps are you using on your phone that are then harvesting data from other elements of that mobile device being used, things of that nature. Be cautious of where you put your data.
So I guess I will. I second everything that Mike has said. I apologize. I was reading the chat trying to dissect the
question.
wall there. Yeah.
Well,
So there's a couple different ones that have come through. First off, if you focus your studies on the security architect domain, will it enhance your job prospects? Well, it all depends on what exactly you're looking for in terms of a role. Anytime you gain additional experience, it's going to help you by furthering your career and giving you access to additional job prospects. That's a big one. Security architecture rather than roles such as pen testing and SOC analyst. So security architecture, you're going to basically be building the solutions for the most part. That is going to be different than obviously an analyst or pen testing. Analyst is going to be more on the blue team side of things, where you're looking at what was coming in, how did we prevent it, or how could we have prevented this if we had better, tech, which is where the architect is actually going to come in, because when something gets through, you're the one they're going to tag to say, make it not happen again. So that it's good. I mean, it's good that you have the understanding of that. And pen testing is opposite side of the world. You're the one that's trying to annoy somebody's day by getting through all their stuff. Honestly, if you have that mindset and you love annoying people, it's wonderful. Are there opportunities? Yeah, lots of opportunities, and more coming every day as people finally wake up and realize that security is a necessity. It's not just checking a box, and it's not, oh, well, my CISO has a friend that works at this company and they'll give us this version of this, but it doesn't do anything. And oh, by the way, we tried to set it up like an easy bake oven and we made some really crappy muffins. Now we got to actually fix this. So yeah, there's a lot that you could actually do. Security architect positions are going to be more senior level. The expectation is you have the fundamentals, you have the foundation, you've been doing the fundamentals and foundation for a number of years to actually prove not just that you have the expertise, but the key word here is mastery.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say, well, I've done this for a couple of years, I should be able to move into this role. Great. Do you think that Leo Messi just became how he was because he said, "Oh, I've kicked the ball a couple times in my yard. I'm good." No, there's mastery involved with that. Lots of time, lots of practice, lots of honing your craft in order to get to the level where you could work as, a higher level architect. Next, hello, and how are you guys doing? We're doing fantastic. Hopefully, you're having a good day. Um, is CISSP as tough as OSCP? Interesting question. Harder to answer because OSCP has its own learning track, which is a pain to go through. It requires tons and tons of experience and mastery to actually get through OSCP. Now, CISSP, not as difficult. Um, Honestly, the test for CISSP is kind of funny because there's like 5 different practices that CISSP encompasses. But when you go to take the exam, it only hits on one of those practices. And you don't know which one you're going to get. So if you get one of the practices that you are like really good at, then it's easy to go through. It's like a cakewalk. The part that sucks with CISSP is most people think when they're starting out, okay, I'm working on a security team. I'm doing entry level. I need to get my CISSP. Well, here's the downside to getting anything with the SSP group or ISSP group. Yeah, you have to have a lot of experience, first off. Then, in order to obtain your certification, you have to have somebody who sponsors you. Then, to maintain your certification, you have to do all kinds of continued education. If you don't do the continued education within the time frame, there's additional stuff that you have to do in order to prove that you've still or retained mastery and are eligible for all of this. And then the financial aspect. It's expensive to do any of this stuff, but just to re-up your license is a little bit, well, there's a cost to it. And a lot of people do not like incurring that cost. And a lot of organizations will not pay for that cost because it doesn't necessarily benefit them to have somebody that's a CISSP. Whereas there's other certifications that would be more beneficial to, their environment and give them access to different things. As far as the last question you have about which certification, I could not even start to tell you that because recognized is not something that I look at.
Mm-hmm.
I know my colleagues here probably have a different view of this, but what I look at is if I see somebody that comes in and they have a whole bunch of certifications, but they have no experience, I have red flags that go off instantly. In my mind, that signifies this person's great at doing adaptive testing, but they don't have the practical experience. And I've seen, unfortunately, that happen with quite a few people. They go and they get 5 or 6 certs and they start applying for jobs. They get into the job and they realize, oh, I don't have the experience for this. And then it becomes kind of depressing and it's just, I don't know, you don't want to be in that position.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Well, thank you so much, Numplex, for coming into the chat and engaging with us and bringing up some wonderful questions. We appreciate your time. If you have any more questions about cybersecurity and how to get your foot in the door, we actually do have a previous live stream going through that topic. And we also have some blogs at blockworks.com/blogs if you want to discover that a little bit deeper as well. Remember, by staying informed and proactive, we can better defend against the evolving threats lurking in the hidden cyber underworld. And thank you all for tuning in to this discussion. And also, don't forget, we go live and post new episodes every Thursday between 2 and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. As always, stay frosty.